All right, this is the second time I'm going through this. The first time I waffled on way too long with a bunch of unnecessary details. So I'll try to be quick here. My name is Edward Cole Hyatt. I've been taking the summer Python course. This is my final project. It is rather last minute. And again, I am sorry for missing the project meeting. You told me to go ahead anyways. I hope, even if I lose these 5 points, that this project is adequate and up to the standards you want with this. So, what am I doing? An introduction. I am part of IEEE at UNO. I'm an electrical engineering student. And at IEEE, we have a lot of giant things, but we have a large quantity of items, chips, resistors, switches, all sorts of components, and nobody knows what we have, or at least we didn't until sometime last year. I started a cataloging project. This Google Sheets file is the results of that project. It is unfinished, but it has a lot of stuff. It is mainly divided up by name, quantity, location, and description. Although, as you see as I scroll through this, I did not always stick to that format. But for the purpose of this prototype, we are sticking to that format. Future iterations, I'll either have to modify this file to be different, or I will have to modify how I do my searches to look for information. So normally you would just use Control F to find things that had different stuff in them, but you couldn't necessarily search only in one row. There's ways I can implement filters for this kind of file, but one, I haven't learned how to do that myself. And two, we want to put this eventually on some dedicated hardware, the microcontroller and a screen in the IEEE root. So this serves as a prototype, even though it's on Windows. Um, this serves as a nice prototype to figure out how that interaction would work. And also I can, like I said, separate certain things out a bit more. So let's remove this for a minute. Whoops. And then open it back up. Right now, you just open it by calling the main file. So let's see, I wanted to search for one of the 74 chips. There's a lot of chips in the 74 series, and I don't necessarily want to find something that there's 74 in stock of. Although we'll look at that in a moment too. So here's a list of all the 7400 class chips. Most of these I've put descriptions for. So we've got this guy, the 42, which is a binary count decimal to decimal decoder. That's the kind of chip that a lot of students will use within their first 2 years for various labs. And the ones that they get in their kits don't always work, so they might go looking for one. And so now they can just search up and find, oh, in the 7400 series, here's one that does that. But if they want to be more specific, right, that's why I have so many different search boxes. They can say BCD and look for a chip that is a BCD chip. And you can see one of the problems with this. Ooh, that's new. My program's crashed. That has never happened before. I wonder if that's from my clicking or something else. No. So let's clear the screen. Let's reopen that description. BCD. There we go. We get 4 results that have BCD in their description. So there's the decimal decoder we talked about earlier. There's 2 meant specifically for 7 segments with some differing information. And there's this different chip, CD 4510, which is a pre-testable up and down version. And some of these I've included links with when stuff is particularly confusing. And that's the end of that search. So it's one way to search up this file. I just converted it using, where was it? Yeah, using the download, just the CSV file that comes off of here. It's a little crazy. Can't zoom it in the way right now. There we go. Um, doesn't look nearly as nice. So, at risk of waffling on too much longer, that's a demonstration of how it works. Obviously, it can still crash a little bit. Most input is valid, right? Like the 74 series had numbers in its name, but there's also letters that'll be in chip names. And if you take a look through some of the descriptions, you'll notice even special characters appearing, like dashes and um, parentheses and colons and all sorts of stuff. So it's not super helpful to cut out a lot of different user input. The only place it matters for is the quantity. I have that mostly implemented. I only say mostly because I am lacking a default value for token. So right now, if I actually put in this else statement, I can end up in situations where I never actually initialize token. And obviously the program doesn't like that. And I haven't decided on a default value for token that I'll handle. What I could do is, because this is the only situation where token value might not be initiated. -1. Because I do have in here, um, well, what would happen is this shouldn't throw an error. I'm very curious. I know it's not good form to be working on this as I'm presenting it to you. So if I put in like A, which is obviously not a number. Yeah, okay. This throws an error. So this is caught by my error handling, which is a little clunky. It's just not specifically one of these errors, but it throws an error and we can keep working, right? I can say 3, go back to here. Yeah, and we keep working. So throws an error, should be handled a little better, but the program does not crash, which is the most important part. So that's how it handles errors. Again, I apologize for missing the project meeting and not getting meaningful feedback. I should state a few of the common issues you might have with this. All these different text boxes, because this is a search, I don't want to just delete the results from someone every time they switch between like different tabs or they switch between radio buttons or every time they search. So right now, everything will stay on the screen unless I specifically say, hey, clear it. And then that gets rid of everything. Then if I have nothing selected, it still asks me to fill out relevant values. We do end up with some interesting behavior there. Haven't quite figured that out. What I wanted to do, rather than have right this one window and then into command prompt, I wanted to have a dialog box on the side. I ran out of time to properly implement that. It would have looked something like this, which as you see is very similar to what the command prompt looks like. Relevant results, end of results, and then just a list of every single line that had a valid match. As far as I know, other people just do this in Excel. If someone else has done something like this, I haven't looked for or found it. There might be a few bits of code I mostly change things when I implement them. I look up code to find ideas and how to do things. So there shouldn't be any, and it shouldn't be relevant. Uh, for reference, when I look for things, I often end up on places like Geeks for Geeks or the actual documentation for things. But it depends on the specific thing I'm looking for and how complicated it is. Usually simpler things are straight from Geeks for Geeks, or at least the ideas that they present in there, right? Like I'd forgotten about using the in keyword to search strings. That's from them. So new concepts learned, a lot of simple things. Like I just said, learning how to search within strings without any big imports. Um, Certain other strange things, like when I'm doing typecasting, I can't typecast to a string unless I import the string library, which is very strange to me, but it's how it is. Um, there's always the rediscovering of things, like when I was still writing to new files, how W just overwrites the file, which worked in the way I was doing it then, but I've since changed my mind as to how I want that to function. I lost a lot of time because in this project I used a main window. In the previous GUI project, I did not use main window. I used a dialog box. And when you have your class here that implement interfaces with your GUI function, it needs to have the proper value here in this first spot. And I think it was QDialog from last time, does not have all the things that QMainWindow does. Specifically, it lacks the call to set central widget, and that caused me 2 days of headache. I could not figure out why that was happening, and a lot of the recommendations online are just ways to redefine the statement down here, and they're because of that they're almost completely useless. Because this wasn't the problem. The problem was I had misdiagnosed. I had mistyped the the very parameters of my class. Some other stuff I didn't understand at first that the function you call at the end of a button event can be any function you define. So that's been very nice. I mostly just use the search event function here, but I also have a clear values button, which calls this. These two don't need to be separated. I thought I was going to have more specific clear functions. Um, but this will clear all the text in all the input boxes, and this will clear all the radio buttons as relevant. And then just a lot of stuff with messing around with PyQt, just what kind of inputs I want, how to get inputs to talk to each other, right? Some interesting stuff with bounding boxes. I tried messing with the menu bar. Um, it was very cool what you can do with it, but just haven't properly gone through with the potential of that in this version of this prototype. I would like to stress this is very much a prototype for how I want this to end up. I'm spending a lot of time thinking about how do I want people to interact with it, right? Do I want input to disappear when I do stuff? Uh, do I want things to be directly searched or partially searched and so on? Like direct matches or match within a word. I think I've talked about a couple of my challenges, and I think I talked about a little bit of the concepts of how you go about this. There's always so much time just trying to figure out how to do some of the bigger stuff. You do get a little lost and forget to implement some of the smaller stuff. But that's something I'm constantly relearning in all my projects. So yeah, that's that. I'm going to submit that now. I had a wonderful summer, a lot of work, but thank you, and I hope you have a good school year. Hope